Hi, this is AJ. Welcome to our second commentary. This one is called Body and Mind. As you might guess, it's about body and mind. Interesting. Specifically, what I want to talk about is something that I have been yelling at you and talking to you about during most of these lessons, which is the connection between our body and our mind. And one of the biggest problems, I won't say the biggest, but it's certainly one of the biggest problems with our schools now, is that we have separated body and mind. We have this idea that learning is something we do sitting down, sitting still, not moving. That we just sit, we passively listen to some teacher talking, and that's learning. That's what happens in most of our schools in most countries of the world. Well, in fact, that is a very, very inefficient way to learn. It is not very effective. Do you learn something that way? Sure, you do learn something, but you learn more slowly, less deeply, less powerfully than if you can combine your body and mind, if you can learn through your mind and your body at the same time. Now, I've had a couple of very interesting experiences and have learned from a couple people about this idea. And it's helped me develop this sort of idea and this teaching style. And one of the first persons I learned from was Dr. James Asher. And Dr. Asher is a language teacher and a professor at a San Jose University in California. And he developed a language learning method called TPR. TPR. TPR stands for Total Physical Response. Total Physical Response. And it's a teaching method that works especially well with beginners. It's a great, great method for teaching beginners. In fact, if I ever develop English lessons for beginners, I will use TPR to teach beginning English because it is a very, very powerful method. In TPR, students learn a language not from translation, not by sitting passively in a chair, but through movement. They learn the basic core of the language with movement. How does this work? Well, a simple example. For example, pretend that I have a class, and it's a beginning class. They zero English, right? Everyone in the class has zero English. They don't know anything, not one word of English. Well, how would I teach them? What's the best way to teach them? Well, normally, in a normal class, they would be taught with translation, right? The teacher would say, for example, if they want to teach the word stand up. Well, they would write stand up on the board, and then they would translate that phrase into their native language. So if we imagine, let's say in Japan, so we have Japanese students. The teacher in Japan would write stand up on the board, and then the teacher would translate that into Japanese. And that's how the students would learn the word or the phrase stand up. They would learn it by translation. They would write it in their notebook, and then they would try to memorize it again and again. Stand up equals this. Stand up equals this. Translation, memorize. Well, that is purely mental, right? They're just sitting in their chair. There's nothing happening with their body. It's just a mental exercise. Yes, they do eventually learn the phrase stand up, but they don't learn it deeply. And that's why most Japanese students, for example, cannot speak English very well, and they don't understand spoken English very well. Written English is different because written English is more of a mental process. You can go slowly if you need to. But spoken English requires fast, instant understanding, and you really need to learn it in your body. It needs to go deep into your mind and body if you're going to understand and speak fast at native speeds. How would Dr. Asher teach it? Because really it's his method originally. Well, Dr. Asher developed a completely different way to teach this. which is with movement and without translation. So what he would do, he'd sit in a chair, and then he would stand up, and as he stood up at the same time, he would say the phrase, "Stand up." Then he would sit down physically in front of the class. He would sit down. As he sat down, he would say the phrase, "Sit down." Then he would stand up, and as he stood up, he would stand up with his body physically. And then he would sit down, and he would say the phrase, "Sit down." Over and over again. And, pretty soon, the students, they understand. I see, yes. He's standing and he's saying this phrase. It must mean stand up. And then when he sits, he says a different phrase. That must mean sit down. They have some mental understanding. But at that level, it's still just mental. There's no translation, so that's better than the old method. But it's still only mental. It's not so deep. So next, Dr. Asher picks a couple students, maybe some students who learn very quickly. He brings them to the front of the class. And they have chairs. They all sit together in the chairs. Dr. Asher in the middle, and maybe one student on his left and one student on his right. They're all sitting. And then he looks at the students, and he stands up, and then he looks at these students with him, and he kind of uses his hands to, stand up, right? And the students look at him, and they copy his movement. So they stand up. And then Dr. Asher says, "Sit down." And then he sits, and they look at him, and they copy his movements, and they sit down. He repeats this many times. Next, Dr. Asher walks over to the corner of the room, maybe. The students in the front of the class, the model students, are still sitting in the chairs. And this time he just says, he doesn't demonstrate this time. No demonstration, he just says it. He says, "Stand up," and he looks at the students. And what happens? Well, they're smart students, right? So they just stand up. They're starting to understand. They stand up, and then he says, "Good." He claps. "Yay, good job, yay, yay." Everybody in the class claps, yay. And then he says, "Sit down." And the students in front of the class, the two students, they sit down. Everybody claps, "Yay, very good job." But it's not finished. So these students are now models. They're examples. They're role models. And all of the class is learning from them. They see, I know what to do. So, of course, at this point, mentally, everybody understands. They know what's happening. They understand the two phrases. But it's still not deep enough yet because they got to get it into their own bodies. So next, Dr. Asher says, "Okay, thank you." The students go and they sit down. And now all of the class follows Dr. Asher. So he sits in his chair again. And he says, "Stand up." And then he stands up and he points to the class. And everybody in the class stands up with him. And then he claps, "Yay, good job." And then he says, "Sit down." He sits down. All of the class sits down with him. Right now they're getting it in their bodies. It's not just intellectual. It's becoming physical. They are learning with their mind and their body at the same time. And he repeats this again and again and again. And then what he does is he stops demonstrating. So he stands in the corner of the class and he just says, "Stand up." All the students stand. He says, "Sit down." All the students sit down. They're not copying him anymore. Now they're just responding to his words. Stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. And the class is standing up physically, sitting down physically, standing up physically, sitting down physically. Again and again. And by doing this process, what happens is the language goes deep, deep, deep into the unconscious, into the physical body. As a result, the students learn these phrases much more deeply. How do we know this? Because we give them tests. Right, so he continues. Of course, this is a very basic example. It would be the first class. But this process gets more complicated very quickly. So that later in the class, maybe 2 weeks later, Dr. Asher is saying something like, "Go to the corner, pick up the red book, bring it to Susan, and then sit down." Wow, right? So now we have a very long, complicated command. What happens? Well, the students actually do it. They stand up, they go to the corner, they pick up the blue book, they give it to Susan, who's another student, and then they sit down. All these physical actions, they have learned all of this. They have learned the verb go. They have learned the location, corner. They've learned the verb pick up. They've learned the word book. They've learned the word blue, the adjective blue, etc. So in this way, they're learning all these nouns and verbs and adjectives and prepositions, but they're learning it with their bodies, their physical bodies. There's no translation happening, and it's not just intellectual. They are doing all of these things. They're getting it deep, deep, deep because they're using mind and body at the same time. So what's really great about this is the final result. Here's what happens. We have a class with Dr. Asher, or with me, using TPR, using this physical way of learning. And then we have another normal class, using translation and grammar and textbooks. We start them at 0. They're both 0 level. And we teach them for 6 months. One class using the physical method, body and mind. The other class just mental. At the end of 6 months, we give them tests. We test their vocabulary. We test their grammar. We test their listening ability. We test their speaking ability, their writing ability. We test everything. And this is the amazing part. The class that learned with their bodies has learned 4 or 5 times more. They have learned not just a little more, a lot more than the traditional normal class. Their understanding is much better. Their vocabulary is much larger. Their speaking ability is better. Everything is better. And not just a little better, a lot better. Here's another thing we found with research. Over a long time, let's say 1 year, 2 years, we look at both groups and we see which group continues to learn English and which group, quits. Because really the biggest problem with language learning, with English learning, I think the number one problem is people quit. They just stop. They get frustrated. They're depressed. They think, I can't do it, and they quit. So you can't learn if you're not trying. And so they compare the rates. They compare how many people eventually quit from the physical class and how many eventually quit from the traditional classes. And this is another big advantage. The people who use the physical method stay with English. They continue studying. Why? Because they enjoy it. Why? Because they're successful. They feel successful. They feel confident. They're learning faster. They're doing better. And it's fun. They're using their mind and their body at the same time. They're moving. They're laughing. It's great. The other class, they're bored and they feel like failures. So their dropout rate, their quitting rate is much, much higher in the traditional classes over time, 1 year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. Most people in the traditional classes just quit. If they're not forced to learn, if they have a choice, eventually they just leave the classes. They stop studying English as soon as they can. Most people, like 80 or 90%, it's a really high level. But the people in the physical classes, many more of them continue learning English. They stay in the class. And as a result, many more of them actually become fluent. So another person I learned from about this idea of body and mind connected and learning with both is Tony Robbins. And I've mentioned Tony before, especially in the beginning lessons. Tony is he doesn't like to be called a motivational speaker. He teaches people how to, take control of their lives, how to live the kind of life they want. And a lot of those beginning lessons talk about many of Tony's ideas. And Tony, in his seminars, especially in his seminars, he uses body and mind at the same time. You don't go to a Tony Robbins seminar and sit in a chair for 12 hours and do nothing and just listen to him and take notes. No, he has you jumping and shouting and yelling. You are always using your body to learn from him. And he has this phrase. He says, get it into your body. He's like, you don't really know something, anything, until it's in your body, until your mind and body have learned it together. That's when you really know something deeply. Any idea, any belief, anything. When it's in your body, that's when it's effortless. That's when it's easy. That's when you are a master. When you get English into your body, when it's not just understanding the word run, run, and then you translate it to your language. That's mental, that's nothing. But if you say the English word run, and then you run in place, you're running with your body, you're moving your legs up and down, like I am right now, there's a much deeper connection in your mind, in your nervous system, in your physical body. And then when you get that, and you do it again and again and again, body and mind, that word becomes part of you. You'll never forget it. And you will use it quickly, easily, effortlessly, like a native speaker. That's why native speakers speak their language so effortlessly. It's not just in their head, it's in their body, and it's in their whole body. So that's why I talk so much, and I'm always reminding you and telling you, move while you do these lessons. Move your hands, move your arms, shout loudly. Move your face, big smiles, big facial expressions. Exaggerate everything. I have one more example of this. And that comes from a time in my past when I studied Italian for a little bit. And a little bit, I mean very little. I studied Italian for 1 month. Because actually my sister won a free trip to Italy. So just to Rome. Go to Rome and Florence for 1 week, basically. 10 days, I think it was. So I was excited. She said, you can come with me, because it was two people. It was a free trip to Italy for 2 people. So my sister and I were going to go. And, I had never studied Italian before, but I thought, it might be fun just to learn a little Italian just for this 1 week. I'm not going to become fluent. I don't care about becoming fluent in Italian and speaking perfectly. I'll just study a little bit just for 1 month. Maybe I can, talk to somebody at a bar or, just order something at a restaurant. Very simple. So I studied Italian. I had these CDs, it was actually Pimsleur CDs. And I listened to them in my car when I went to work. But I did something different when I learned Italian, different from other languages I have studied. And what I did is I moved my body like crazy when I was learning Italian. I'm driving in the car, and I think it's because I've seen a lot of movies with Italian people or Italian Americans, and they're always like moving their arms, and they're very passionate when they're speaking. And I don't know if that's true of all Italian people. Of course, it's not true of all Italian people, but it's certainly this image you get from movies. And it's really fun. I like it. I love that image of Italians, very passionate and moving their hands and speaking with passion. So I don't know why, but it just was fun. As I listened to these tapes and I would repeat, it was just normal, repeat the phrase. I would move my arms. So I'm driving with one hand on the wheel in my car, and I'm moving my arms and my body, and I have these big facial expressions. And I'm saying, buongiorno, right? I didn't say it quietly. I would say it really loud. And I even had this sort of fake, exaggerated Italian accent when I spoke. It wasn't a real Italian accent because I didn't know any Italian, but I tried. It wasn't just a normal American, plain, flat accent. I remembered the accents I've heard in movies, and I thought, well, this is fun. Buongiorno! Buongiorno! And I moved my arms, and I said it. I was screaming it in my car. So I didn't know at the time what I was doing, really. But something interesting happened. When we went on our trip, when we finally went to Italy, I found myself speaking Italian. I had a tiny vocabulary. Just 1 month of studying. So my vocabulary was tiny, tiny. I didn't know grammar at all. Nothing. I didn't know the past tense. Present tense. That was it. And a tiny vocabulary. But because the little bit I learned, I had it in my body. It just came out. I don't know what happened. For example, I got on a bus with my sister and some other people. And we made a mistake. We did not pay for the bus. There was a machine in the back of the bus. You had to get a ticket and pay. I didn't know about this. And so we got in trouble. These little bus police pulled us off the bus. And they said, you didn't pay, you don't have a ticket. And they wanted us to, pay this big amount of money, like a big penalty, a big fee. And nobody in the little group I was with, they're all Americans. Nobody spoke any Italian, zero. So I was the only one. I had a tiny bit of Italian. So the police were telling me, oh, you guys didn't pay. I don't know how. I have no idea how. But I understood what they were saying. The basic idea, not every word, but I basically understood what they're saying. And I just started speaking Italian. I have no idea how I did it. And I'm using some English words too, because if I didn't know the Italian, I would just say it in English. So I'm mixing Italian and English, but I'm just speaking really fast. And my arms are moving and my hands are moving, just like in my car, as I was listening to those CDs before. It was amazing. It was the most fluent I have ever spoken another language. And yet, I was a total beginner. Maybe I knew 100 words in Italian, maybe less than that. But the words I learned were in my body. And it just came out because I learned physically. It wasn't just mental. And it's like, aha, this is interesting. Maybe we should do this all the time. Maybe when I teach English, I should get my students moving their arms and jumping around and exaggerating their accent so they sound like cowboys or they sound like crazy Americans like me. So this is something to think about. I promise you, this works. This works, and it works powerfully. So anytime you listen to English, whether it's my lessons or you're listening to something on the internet or you're watching an English movie, it doesn't matter. When you listen, move that body. And when you're practicing speaking, come out of it with emotion. Exaggerate everything. Move your body like an American, whatever that means to you. Just imagine like an exaggerated American, like Jim Carrey. The actor, the comedian Jim Carrey, or, John Wayne, the old cowboy, or Clint Eastwood. Somebody, your idea of an American, of a exaggerated, typical American, or British person if you're learning British English. Move like them, speak like them, exaggerate their accent, exaggerate the facial expressions. And when you speak, do it really loudly. Get your whole body into it. Use your whole body as you do it. And you're going to connect that mind and body together, and it's so powerful. When you do that again and again and again, every time, every day, every lesson, everything you listen to, every time you speak English or practice it, you will create amazing fluency. You're going to be shocked and surprised. You won't believe it. Because one day, some American person or some native speaker is going to talk to you in English, and you're just going to start speaking. It's going to come out of your mouth. You won't know, wow, where did it come from? This is amazing. I'm not thinking. I'm not translating. It's just coming out of my mouth. It's possible. Not only is it possible, it will definitely happen, but you've got to use your body very powerfully to get this result. You can't just a little bit. Oh, yeah, move your body a little, smile a little, shoulders back a little, weak voice. That won't work. That will get you weak results. The more powerfully you move your body as you listen to and speak English, the more fluency you will develop. You wire it in. You put it into your body, into your nervous system. Mind and body are connected. It is so powerful. You won't believe the fluency. It's amazing, but you've got to do it with all of that energy, all of that passion. You really have got to do it strongly and powerfully every time. Not one time, not 1 week, not sometimes. Every single time you listen to or speak English, use all of your body, all of your voice, and you will create just amazing fluency. I promise you. We'll give you your money back. I'll give you all of your money back. I'll give you 2 times your money back if you do this and you get no result. Why do I promise you that? Because I know it works. It's 100% guaranteed. I have no question about it. I know it works. It works every time. But it only works if you do what I'm telling you. Some students, I'm shy. I can't do that. Bullshit. Do it alone in your apartment or in your car where nobody's watching you, nobody's looking, if necessary. Some of you are crazy like me. You'll do it on the street. But if you're shy or something, fine. Do it at home. Lock the door so your, husband or wife or kids or roommates can't see you. And just get in there and start shouting and jumping and moving as you're doing your English lessons, as you're listening to English, as you're speaking English. Moving your body, pouring your body into it every single time. And then after you do this for 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, write on the forums your results. I promise you, the results are going to be amazing. All right, so this has been kind of a long commentary, but it's so important, it's so powerful, and it's damn fun too. So it's really the center of my system. This is the effortless English system. This is the most important part, the central part. Without this, nothing else works. This is the fuel, this is the energy for all of it. All right, so do it. Okay, good. Do you understand that I feel strongly about this? I hope you do. All right, I will see you next time for the next commentary. Meanwhile, move that body. See you next time. Bye-bye.